Kind of an outlet for the awe really that I have for our planet. So one of the planets doesn't work very well. It's a tale of two planets, and Retha, which is Earth all mixed up. Things don't work. They don't have wind that blows. The plants don't make their own pollen. The tree leaves don't decay to make plant food. When it rains, the oceans don't fill with water. They have to do all of these things on their planet, and they read about Earth, the magic planet, and they laugh because all of these things just automatically work without anybody having to even think about them. And they think it's fiction. They think it's made up because nothing could be that incredibly magic.
Hi everyone, welcome to Now Boarding, a travel podcast by me, Payal Nair. This show aims at creating awareness about ecotourism, sustainable tourism, responsible travel, and a lot more. We will cover stories and journeys of people who are ecotourism specialists and those who are leaders in their field. We will also be talking to people who have had unique travel experiences, remarkable conceptual places to stay, unexplored cultures, and ancient histories of various towns and cities around the world. Join me in this journey of knowing more about travel. Get inspired to see the world and discover your inner self. Hi everyone, welcome to another Now Boarding episode. Today I am in conversation with a very accomplished lady, Mary Trudeau. Mary is a professional engineer. She specializes in water resources. She's also got a PhD in geography. Mary's an environmental consultant in water management and in urban water sanitization. She's got over 30 years of experience in development and implementation of water policy programs and projects. Mary has also written a children's book to celebrate the beauty of our amazing planet. The book is called A Tale of Two Planets, and I know that Mary is very keen to talk about the book with us. I just recently watched one of her TED Talks, and I couldn't help but pick up this one thing that she's mentioned, which I'm going to quote before we start the conversation. Mary says, "We can influence nature, but are not in control of nature." Thank you so much for joining me today, Mary.
Thank you. I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start by understanding how you got into this journey of doing English literature, becoming a civil engineer, and then following it up with a PhD in geography.
I've gone back to school every 10 years or so during my career. I actually got the English degree while I was working as an engineer, just because I have a range of interests and I love engineering, the math and the physics. But when you do an engineering degree, there's little opportunity to really study English literature or the arts more generally, history, and to really understand society and how people make decisions in our past, where we're coming from. It's about people and culture. It's not as much about math and science. Maybe that's too obvious to say even, but it's hard to keep your eye on that when you're in the middle of an engineering degree. So I really enjoy literature and like writing, obviously books. And then through my career, so my career has been focusing on water and environment more broadly. And every so often I would come up against something that I really felt I didn't know. And did a master's degree after working for about 10 years. And that was to develop arguments that weren't only about science in order to inspire pollution prevention. And then my PhD, I finished that in 2016. And that I wanted to know more about biodiversity decline in cities. But my business partners at the time, I had 5 other business partners and we sold our company, and I had a non-disclosure agreement, so I could not, or a non-compete agreement, so I couldn't work as a consultant. And so that's when I went back to school for the PhD. So it just worked out through my career that I just kept going back to school. I'm done now, though.
I wanted to understand because obviously you've had
30 years of experience. So, what are some of the very significant changes in this field that you have seen, and how have you actually adapted to these changes?
One of the most encouraging change is the growing awareness of the public about the fact that we live on a finite planet. We're not.
That's a positive change.
Absolutely. That's a positive change, because once people are aware, then they can more actively take part in some of the actions that we need to take. Well, the negative thing, so I've worked in water, and as we expand cities with sprawl, going out into green fields, like areas that aren't previously developed, there's some really dramatic changes. And a lot of cities around the world have aspirations for intensification, it's called. So for building more intensely in the center of the city rather than sprawl. But there's huge pressure from the development community to build in greenfields areas. And of course, there's also the demand from consumers. So some of the impacts on aquatic systems are massive, and it's not just pollution. That's the obvious thing that people know about, but it's also water temperature. For example, when you put in a road rather than a meadow or a forest, the asphalt's very warm and the water runs right off. It doesn't generally go from the street to a treatment facility. It goes from the street into a creek. And there's the different communities of fish live in warm water versus cold water. That's just temperature alone changes the habitat for fish. And then there's the volume of water as well. There's so much water held by vegetation. Then when you cut that down and put in roads and houses, all of that water, that volume is also flowing into the nearby creek. And that's a lot of momentum, like it just blows out the creek. So it's water quality, water quantity, water temperature, all of these things change as we continue to develop urban areas, more intense farming, larger industrial sites. All of these things that grow the economy are also things that have consequences for our environment.
Yeah, and you do advise government agencies on water and climate adaptation policy. So, what are some of the key considerations that need to be actually addressed when developing effective climate adaptation strategies? And how do you communicate this in terms of talking to the government agencies or the ones that are actually responsible, in giving them suggestions and working with them on policies in order to improve the situation?
Yes, there's always a multiple pronged approach. We got into this situation making a whole lot of decisions over a long period of time. So there's no one single solution. And one of those important prongs is always public education, so that people know if they live in a floodplain. For example, like a floodplain is an area that will eventually flood based on where a river flows. And people like living near rivers, but with climate change, we're getting more intense rainstorms, which means that we get a greater risk of flood. In some areas, there are things people can do on their own properties to waterproof their homes. And in terms of government advice, it's looking at the big picture in terms of, are there certain market signals that can be sent to assist people in making decisions? Are there regulations on, for example, not building in a floodplain? Those are generally a lower tier in Canada anyway. They're not the federal government that make those decisions. We've got quite a complicated governance structure in Canada, and many countries do. So federal governments and state or provincial governments have to work with municipal governments. There's not one decision maker, there's a whole suite of decision makers. So understanding jurisdictions, understanding the options between regulation, market signals, voluntary, so engaging industry to create programs that have credibility with the marketplace to bring in educated consumers, and then information campaigns are the suite of management instruments that governments have to use.
And you feel like you are seeing a change, and you are seeing these different agencies becoming more and more receptive and getting a better understanding of how critical the situation is at the moment?
Yes, certainly government are seeing the change. It's interesting that the first group to really start becoming aware was the insurance industry, because they saw the increased claims, right? And they were worried about climate change and climate adaptation quite a long time before it really started showing up on the agenda of government decision makers. But they're now working together in a lot of areas to try and mitigate the risk, educate the public, make decisions. So sometimes you see, sometimes there's positive aspects, but other times, for example, with plastic pollution, that's not a climate change issue, but it's certainly a water environment issue. And really there, it's about source control. We just use plastic in so many areas that it's quite challenging for governments to really figure out where to regulate versus encourage, versus actually discourage use or encourage use, like in the medical industry, for example, where plastics are well established for some hygienic reasons.
Yeah, interesting. Because you are so scientific, I wonder how you strike a balance between the scientific aspects and, that you are involved in terms of your work, and the more intuitive, emotional connection that you have with nature. Because you also mentioned that you like to be outdoors and you like to spend a lot of time connected with nature. So how these are two very different aspects of your work versus the kind of person you are. So how do you actually manage to get that balance?
It's interesting because I find nature restorative. Like when you work in the environmental field, it can be quite challenging. There can be days when it's quite depressing. Got a lot of work to do, and there's something about nature, and I don't think it's just me. I think in general, nature is restorative, and beauty is restorative as well. So it's a different aspect, but in a lot of ways, getting out in nature and just not even going anywhere necessarily, looking out my window from my home office every once in a while and just saying, wow, my tree is amazing, or my flowers in my garden. It just brings energy back in, and that's so important. If you're working in the environmental field, you need something that's going to rejuvenate that energy, because it can be quite draining. So they're opposite, but they help.
I guess they complement each other.
Yes.
And that must help your emotional well-being, because otherwise, if you were only focused on the scientific aspect of it, you probably would have a burnout. But yeah, no, it's important. You're absolutely right and there is so much to celebrate when it comes to nature. You mentioned trees looking out of your home office, and I feel the same living in a very conservation area in Singapore, which is an urban, but at the same time, there are these pockets of nature reserves and forested areas. I'm not sure if you've been to Singapore. So that kind of creates the balance between nature and urbanization. So looking out of every single window in my home, there are these gorgeous trees. You hear birds chirping every morning and right through the day, actually. And because this is tropical, you also hear roosters. And I'm happy that this morning that we're not being subjected to them calling out. But yeah, so no, it is therapeutic. And I think it's so important for us to be aware of that. As you said at the start of the conversation, how you feel that there is public awareness now, which is so important, and also to appreciate what we have around us and not destroy it. So, no, that completely creates that balance. Let's talk about your book, A
Yes.
Tale of Two Planets. And what actually inspired you to write the book? Because it's also a children's book. And through the book, what are you hoping to convey to your young readers?
It was inspired by the beauty of our planet and just really how much our planet does for us. We don't even have to think about it. And it was a kind of an outlet for the awe, really, that I have for our planet. So one of the planets doesn't work very well. It's a tale of two planets, and Retha, which is Earth all mixed up. Things don't work. They don't have wind that blows. The plants don't make their own pollen. The tree leaves don't decay to make plant food. When it rains, the oceans don't fill with water. They have to do all of these things on their planet. And they read about Earth, the magic planet, and they laugh because all of these things just automatically work without anybody having to even think about them. And they think it's fiction. They think it's made up because nothing could be that incredibly magic. But there's one little alien creature, Anag, who does believe Earth is real and finds some of the answers to the questions that the little aliens ask. What are the special creatures that carry pollen to flowers? The message is that Earth is magic, really. We live in an incredibly beautiful place. And when I read the book to different classes, they get it. The kids right away after the book, I ask the question you asked is, what is the message in this book? And right away they'll say, oh, we're so lucky to live here, or we need to keep our planet magic, and things like that right away. Pretty well all age groups from about 4. 4 is a little bit, maybe a little bit young, but certainly 5 to 8, they really get it.
And are you going to follow this book up with a sequel, or just?
I would like to. It's an aspirational goal, but right now I'm doing my day job and have to keep up with that.
Yeah.
But yes, I do. I would love to do that. It was just so much fun to do a kid's book, really.
I can imagine. And also, I think this generation is definitely far more aware and conscious as compared to us. And I think it's interesting how, like you mentioned, the way they've reacted to the book and the understanding they have and the clear messaging that the book is giving them. You don't have to go into detail explaining it to them. They completely understand. And the way it's like the good versus the bad, and how they are able to very quickly pick the differences and make it obvious that yes, the Earth is magical and we have to do our part in keeping it so. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I think it's not just, obviously you've simplified it because your target audience is young readers, but I think even adults reading the book, I'm sure, would have a similar sort of feeling and impression of the book. So no, that's amazing. So I wanted to just, because of all your experience, what kind of advice would you give to young professionals who are actually passionate about the environmental science and they want to make an impactful and meaningful sort of impact on the planet? What is some advice that you could offer them?
There are things that they can do on every scale if you want. So in the home, whether it's on a high-rise apartment or a home with a backyard, the products that you buy, like the plastics, for example, you can reduce things that are single use. Reduce if you have like a garden of some kind, the pesticides or the chemicals that you use, and native plants for whatever area you're in, and just being conscious of resource use, whether the amount that you drive, where your food comes from, all of these, they seem like little decisions because they're one household, one person or one household, but cumulatively they add up. Cumulatively, they've added up for global change, and cumulatively they'll add up to make a difference. So that's at the sort of the individual scale. And then there's the community, whether it's a municipality or a farming community, whatever the community is, letting politicians know that they do care about the environment, maybe volunteering for a park cleanup or a river cleanup. There's different organizations around the world that organize anything from litter to helping kids spend a day in the park. And then national level, again, letting politicians know that it's important to them, writing letters or showing up to rallies or marches if those are taking place. And then there's global organizations as well, World Wildlife Fund, for example. They have different initiatives in different countries, whether it's volunteering time, making some kind of donation if they don't have time, but they have money. But really just drawing on that passion and whatever it is that they feel drawn to, it will make a difference. If enough of us stay at it long enough, we will see a difference.
That is so true. Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone has to play a part in it and make that conscious effort. And then it, like you said, it just becomes a combined effort eventually. And yeah, no, and it's encouraging to hear you also say at the start of the conversation that, which I've repeated before, but I'd to emphasize on that there is more public awareness. And I think that is so important. So thank you so much, Mary. I've really enjoyed talking to you and getting an understanding, and also your whole gamut of experience and what you're giving back, I think is just so important. And it's so creditable and appreciative. So continue to do the good work, although we are like different continents and different parts of the world and different climatically as well. So different from where you are in Canada to where I am in Singapore. But I think the fact that we have similar sort of goals is what, again, is something that is going to bring that much more awareness and is going to help bring about change. So thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Now Boarding, a travel podcast. Check out other episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And of course, don't forget to share your thoughts with us. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes only on Now Boarding, a travel podcast.